Hola community, welcome to BlenderToday, live 233 after a 2-week break because of SIGGRAPH, traveling, and Blender 4.0. It's like the title for this week was Blender 4.0. It's reaching its point where we're still 2 weeks away from Beacon 1 to end, the first development phase where most of the big features are added. But we are already seeing some serious compatibility, let's say changes, improvements for the best that will make Blender 4.0 already pretty different in terms of how your renders are going to look, especially with cycles compared to 3.6 or previous Blender versions, which is a good thing, right? There are improvements to be done, although I think there might be even more to come. What else is new this week? Well, let's go back. So before going on this little break, the version that we were in was 3.6 LTS. Just a new one just came out. However, tomorrow there will be another one coming out. Blender 3.6.2 is going to come out tomorrow, as well as the other LTS. So tomorrow is going to be a double LTS release, 3.6.2 and 3.3.10, I think. Yes, 3.3.10. So yeah, if you had any bugs reported in either version, make sure you update. Also, 3.6, a very special change actually this time, because it's 3.6 or any LTS release and in long-term support only, so it's supposed to only get improvements and well, not improvements, it was just bug fixes and minor improvements if they're like very isolated. But also this time we're gonna get compatibility changes in 3.6, so files are compatible with 4.0. This is forward compatibility, and this is something that it's only possible now that we have the LTS releases, which is good news. It's great news. It means that if you save a file with Blender 4.0 and you open it with 3.5, it's not going to let you do it because of you could lose data, or it's going to throw a big warning before that. However, 3.6 will let you open the files and show you a warning that maybe some data missing because you're opening a Blender file, a file saved with a Blender version that didn't exist at the time of making that release, right? So it's unknown data. So this is going to be one of the reasons why it should be I would highly recommend for you to update if you're using the LTS versions, but it's always good thing to update. Another thing that happened when we were away, it's SIGGRAPH. Yes, SIGGRAPH happened last week in LA. Big part of the team was there. This is the crew, the booth crew there. It was amazing. It was so many people dropping by. Everybody already knows and loves Blender. Many questions about geometry nodes. Very interesting how if you go to NSC, Animation Festival, everybody is about Grease Pencil. Here, everybody was about simulation nodes and geometry nodes. It's a high contrast in there. Other than that, after that, we also spent some time with our friend Iker. So I just wanted to say thanks, Iker. I don't know if you watched the show, probably not. It's pretty busy, but invited us over to the Google offices in the Spruce Goose hangar in Playa Vista, which is super neat to say the least. Other than that, let's see what's new in Blender today. Let's start with the animation side of things. Well, today actually the changelog is pretty large. If you want to see the full list of changes, you can go here to the blender.community post that I made, and you can see there's 675 commits because it's a bunch of weeks put together, of which a bunch of fixes and over 200, like a third of them are just cleanups. There is also refactors. You're gonna find the whole list up here. So let's I'm not gonna explain 600 changes, by the way. I'm just gonna go slowly per section to the ones that maybe I think are more relevant, such as in animation. Let's start. Let's get to it. animation. Disable NLA mapping if no NLA tracks are present. This is a optimization. There's a few optimizations regarding animation editors this week. It's pretty exciting. One of them, NLA mapping. In the NLA, things are going to draw slightly faster, around 13% faster when there are no tracks. Always good. Then the graph editor has two changes in performance that are actually quite significant. So apparently the drawing of a curve in the graph editor wasn't very optimized. It would be calculating things off screen, but also the resolution of the curve would be defined by the distance between the frames, which is not what you want, right? Because if you have, you don't want that, because you zoom out and you still have the same resolution of the curve. So now it depends on the zoom, and it should draw much faster. So from 1 millisecond, like the base is 1 millisecond in how it used to be before, now it will be 77 microseconds. And the same with when zoomed out. If you're zoomed in, it's gonna be much faster. If you're zoomed out, well, what used to take 1 millisecond now is almost half. So hey, nice. Another change, this is also a micro change related also to optimizations and also by Christoph. The same has to do with the F curves in the graph editor. NLA, this is a change in a shortcut, which it's going to be, I think, discussed again, because this is a change in a shortcut that makes things inconsistent with the rest of Blender. Basically, it's changing the way you duplicate NLA strips. So Shift D does the opposite as usual. So instead of duplicating a copy, making a copy, it makes a link duplicate. So it's inverted to how Shift D and Alt D work in other places. So I think we should rethink this, because it was it's a change approved without asking any other module. And I think these shortcut changes that are also used in other parts of Blender, they should be consistent as much as possible. And if there is like a video sequence editor or other editors that are not consistent, then we should make those consistent. But Shift D should always do what Shift D does, Alt D the same. Otherwise, you have to think of like, oh, in which editor am I? Okay, Shift D is going to do this other behavior. Next, a little UI change: right aligned slider unit text in the animation. This is marked as animation, but it should be marked as UI because it's purely your user interface. Basically, the text in the slider operators wasn't aligned properly. Now there is a nice little gap text there, and it's consistent, and it's right aligned, so when the values change, it doesn't jump. Speaking of the slider, there is two operators that now use the slider. Blend offset slider. The offset slider does this. Basically, it offsets the keyframes based on a percentage. So 0 is no change. Minus 100% and 100% moves it in either direction. But you can also unlock it from the limits and just go over 100%. This change, actually, this was done by Aris. That is an animator from DreamWorks that, or used to work, or at least when we met many years ago, he was working at DreamWorks, and is very eager to help and contribute to Blender. He's a Blender fanatic. So we are going to see, he has an add-on that will, I think some of these operations are taken from the add-on and they're going to be moved into C++, be part of Blender. Same as the blend to ease slider. So this again is an operator that it blends the curves into an ease shape. So even if you have anything, you need to quickly make an ease shape, like more or less, you know, easing is when it slowly takes the shape of the last, or it goes from the direction where the points are going into a more soft interpolation, this now can be blended. Blend to ease, also by Addis. Let's move on. So, okay, this one is just a short one. Is BMesh. It's related to BMesh. BMesh, it's the module for it's Blender Mesh, the module that controls many of the operations in takes care of many of the operations in mesh editing. This has been now ported to C++, which is huge. Okay, C++ it's taking over Blender. I think from all the modules, this is one of the biggest ones. So that commit alone was around 2,300, 400 deletions, 2,700 additions. Huge change, and that brings Blender into having less than 9% of C and over 75% of C++. Major milestone over here. And this makes things a lot easier for developers to control memory, it could lead to optimizations, so better performance, and so on and so forth. Let's see. The other change that we're gonna see this week is related to, well, actually many changes related to color management. Color management, a bunch of changes. I'm not gonna mention all of them, but basically, actually I can just show you the screen. Gonna be bright, sorry. So here. So cleanup, no longer use color spaces. Actually, okay, this one is worth mentioning over here. This is step 1 of the AGX project integration. If you care about color space, add drop a colorful emoji in the chat, because we want to see how much is you know, the passion behind color spacing in the community. Delete all the no longer use color spaces in their LUT files. This includes the new Rec 709, LG10, XYZ display device, and its standard view color space. This is one step of many into the integration of the AGX project, which many people are excited. So let's see. I'm checking out the chat here, by the way. A bunch of colorful emojis. People picking colorful emojis. So some of them were not really used. LG10 and Nugar's Rec 709 were not used, and the XYZ display device was initially added to support the output of a TCP compliant J2K. Unfortunately, some of the cursor transform was missing from this initial configuration. So often a custom OpenColor IO configuration was needed. With the addition of Filmic and now HEX, this really became not so usable use case. Again, if you have any comments against it, also let yourself know. But I think with the other commits that I'm going to mention, this should be really a very much welcome change by many. Another one was use Color.io built-in functions for sRGB color space. No functional changes. The other, rename old name-based exceptions, improve non-color managed versioning, further relax threshold for sRGB detection. Yeah, to basically detect sRGB in a to make sRGB detection a bit less strict. Then refactor OpenColor IO config to be CIE XYZ I-E based. Who names these things? The change is motivated by using the actual CIE in standard, preparing for the spectral cycles. Yeah, okay, here we are dropping a lot of... Let me have a mate here. Let me have a drink because we need to talk about these things. Spectral cycles is being worked on. Have a mate, mention, drop a bomb. Although it's research and development at the moment, you know? And you know how big companies spend billions in research, you know? Well, here we are also trying to do that, but not with the billions, but at least few developers working on research. Spectral cycles, there are already some results. I've seen a render of an image that actually has the dispersion that actual, because it's not RGB anymore, right? And the actual dispersion is very noisy, but promising. Nice to see some love here, some colorful, some pride as well. So they're aliases because all the color spacing, color space naming options are name based. The files basically have, or the configurations have names, so they have to be compatible. So there are aliases that should help backwards compatibility. The forward compatibility will be achieved by committing an alias name to the 3.6 release branch. This is what I mentioned before. If you save a file in 4.0 with one of the new color spaces, the 3.6.2 version should open it properly. If it's not 3.2, it should be 3.6. Then the other change, improve no-op color space detection. Again, when it's not detected, what do you do? This has to do with adding aliases, so the old names are compatible with the new ones. And finally, add and rename color spaces. This is the next step towards AGX View Transform project. The sanitization pass over the existing color space names, as well as the addition of some new spaces. For example, the name linear makes no sense when there are a bunch of linear spaces, right? And aliases are included for backwards compatibility. Some of the space descriptions and family tags are also updated, which involves inputting false color into inactive color space instead of using family display filtering. So what are the new spaces? The linear components are linear rec 709, linear DCI P3 D65, and linear rec 2020. The ACES spaces are, the linear ACES spaces are ACES 2065-1, ACES CG, changed from linear SHG, linear ACES CG to ACES CG, since ACES CG already implies a linear transfer function. Otherwise, using linear AP1 ACES might make more sense. Same goes for ACES 2065-1. This is like the like talking about, you know, those pieces that I have very specific naming, like, or screws. And okay, again, next, linear film light eGamut. This is AGX's LUT input encoding. It can potentially be used for interoperability. For display devices, there is now sRGB, Display P3, Rec 1886, Rec 2020. And for Filmic, there is Filmic Log, Filmic sRGB in and false color. Lots of changes. 4.0, it's coming strong. The next. Okay, now we're done with the color spaces. That is for now. Although this is another step towards AGX View Transform project. Pretty exciting, especially for a breaking change release such as 4.0. Kind of related to color, let's talk about the Compositor. This is actually a usability improvement in the Compositor that brings the link drag search that is so useful when working with geometry nodes. Is bringing it into the Compositor. We also need this in the shader editor. I don't know if it's already in the shader editor, but the node editor for geometry nodes, it's so much better in terms of, well, everything. The menus are nicer, has a nicer layout. The drag link search is much better, and it has nice weight for each type of sockets to show. And some of this has been brought into the Compositor for math operations and for mix operations. It has been done by Charlie Jolie, so thank you, Charlie. This was part of a pull request that actually was mentioned in the release notes, where help was wanted in adding this to the Compositor. So thank you, Charlie. Let's move into core changes. This is what I mentioned at the beginning of this show. Implement new blend file compatibility handling. This is what I mentioned before. The minimum version for blend files has been bumped in Blender 4.0, and this makes it so files saved in Blender 4.0 are not going to be compatible with 3.5 and older. So If you're working with 3.5 and you need a file that was made in Blender 4.0, yeah, you need to move into 3.6. 3.6 is compatible because it's an LTS supported for 2 years, so it makes sense for this to happen. The next, well, you can read all about these changes here, and also in the wiki page there is a compatibility handling whole page. Actually, it was mentioned. I received an email by a friend from the community who's had doubts to what to use in production and when to make the jump into the versioning, right? You don't know which version to use, so always go forward. Try not to step back too much in between versions because it could lead to loss of data. From the sea of Compositor, we move into the sea of cycles. There is a bunch of actually, if you look at the whole thread, there is many more cycles changes, but cycles, besides cleanup, the actual cycle section has plenty of changes. The ones I'm going to mention are, first, replace sheen model in the principal BSDF. This is one of those changes that will change slightly how your renders look, so keep an eye on this. This replaces the sheen model in the principal BSDF with the model from this pull request that is already used in the sheen BSDF now. So the node itself, it's here. There is an image. This actually was implemented a while back, so nothing has changed. That it's just that this has been ported over to the principal BSDF node. Why am I talking about files? Oh, because I needed to mention the new change. But before that, some notable differences that I already mentioned when the sheen BSDF has changed, but worth mentioning again. At the full intensity of sheen 1.0, the new model is significantly stronger than the old one. For the existing files, the intensity is adjusted to keep the overall look similar. However, not 100%, so again, keep an eye on that. The sheen tint input is now a color input instead of the previous blend factor between white and the base color. Nice flexibility. And there's now a sheen roughness control, which can be used to tweak the look between velvet-like and dust-like, similar to what we see here, dust, velvet. I mentioned file before because I was thinking of open shading language. Open shading language, this scripting language for making your own shaders, it's now has been made into, so the code has been made so cycles can support working with version 1.13.2 while also keeping compatibility with previous versions. So nice. And back to the BSDF, the principal BSDF, there is now more work on this that makes it so the renders are going to look slightly different, but this is in order to preserve, to have and ensure energy reserve and conservation. So energy conservation is one of those principles for PVR, for have nice realistic renderings. So this change makes it so it's more aligned towards in that direction. However, this changes how the look of the principal BSDF it's going to be on your renders. That's needed. It has to happen because these cases where it looks different are the ones that strongly violate energy conservation, mostly creating reflections with strong specular. And I believe there are some render examples here. So let's look at this. So not this, but this. So this is very subtle. So this is without, this is with, without, with, hold, new. Okay, there is some specular on the edges that it's less intense now, more subtle. Again, in this render by Nikki Blender, you can also tell the difference slightly in the specular, and also on the sides you can see this pumpkin. I don't know if you get to see it because the Very subtle. Old, new, old. It's subtle, but it's going to change how your renders look. And this one with the render from Alex Trevino from the junk shop scene. Again, before, after, slightly darker. You could argue more realistic also. Nice, cool. So these are the differences. Just keep an eye. I don't know who would render half of their film in 3.x and half in 4.0, but don't do that because Blender cycle looks different now between versions. What else? Let's move from cycles into, well, wait. Just to make things a bit more clear. What are all these changes in the Principal VSDF, and what is the Principal VS version 2? I talked to Lucas Stockner, the developer that is working on this in SIGGRAPH in LA. The answer is there is no one switch for the Principal VSDF 2.0. What we just saw and what we've been seeing with the anisotropy changes and with these changes with the sheen changing, that is the Principal VSDF 2.0. It's not just the one change. It's not a one flip of a switch. It's a gradual change. It is many commits, many individual changes, which you're going to see fully realized when you compare 3.6 with 4.0. That is the comparison between VSDF 1.0 and VSDF 2.0. Just want to make that clear because people are still confused. They're still waiting for this magic 2.0, yes, the Principal VSDF 2.0, and it's a gradual change. Next. With D4 depth graph, the depth graph change is a subtle one, but if you had issues, but not subtle. Basically, the changing active cameras wasn't being tagged by the depth graph. So it could lead to depth graph to the animation of the active camera not working in some cases, maybe working in the rendering in the background or rendering with another render engine. So this should make things a bit more robust. Let's move from the D to the E of Eevee next. So yeah, no news in Eevee now because everything is Eevee next. The list is pretty large, and let's quickly go through it. Eevee next now has some support, has support for overscanning, has fixes in motion blur, render region has been fixed, ambient occlusion pass fixed, sculpt mode supported now by Eevee next. Volumes have been also improvement in that area. Normal render pass fixes, there was some flickering there. Ray tracing, the noise pipeline is back and better. Irradiance bake, add the valid, and also improvements in the whole irradiance lighting and irradiance bake, virtual offset and add validity base dilation. Reflection light probes for ray trace now have a fallback. The visibility group for irradiance volumes is back, and irradiance volume improvements, irradiance grid compositing, pool size, and so much more. Eevee next is in full swing, so always good to see that. It's still highly experimental, but it's good to see it in action. And I don't know if you got the news, but Eevee next, it's not one of the 4.0 targets. I know this is a sad thing for everyone, but the idea is for Blender, for Eevee next to be in Blender 4.1, which means instead of November, it's going to be March, April, whenever 4.1 comes out. It's not that big of a deal if you think about it. Let's see. So 4.0 is over here. The release is November 7, but 4.1 should be the next milestone. So where are the milestones? 4.0, 4.1. The release March 5th. It's not that much. It's not that long. I know. It's gonna make for a I mean, the release is in 4 is in March, but Eevee Next should be added in between September and December. So by the end of the year, in the midst of cold winter in the northern hemisphere and party summer in the southern hemisphere, you're gonna have Eevee Next. It's just next release. It's not this release, it's the next release. Sorry about that. Shouldn't make fun of tragedy. Okay. Don't cry. It's better for everyone, especially for developers to be sane. But we could use some more developer help. So if you know how to code, go to developer.blender.org. If you don't know how to code but you still want to contribute, you can support those that want to code for Blender and get paid for it. Imagine, wouldn't that be great? 3,183 individuals have been supporting Blender and are supporting Blender every month, so you can join them. This number, when 3.6 came out, it was 3,200. So actually the numbers are going down, and this is a moment where if you have a little spare change, please, if you're one of the millions of people, of one of the 20 million people that download Blender every year, maybe consider joining. The next change, the next improvement that the Blender Development Fund allows is having Bastian working on the file browser. So there could be times where you have an invalid library. Now you're going to have an actual proper warning when the library is invalid before, instead of silently failing. The next change, okay, there were also improvements in the GPU side of things. So DNA improvements, the draw engine and the depth graph, more in the depth graph. Eevee Next actually had many more changes, and well, fixes, it's over 100, so it's like impossible to cover all of them. Then GPU, many commits in the GPU, which I'm not gonna mention one by one, but I just want to let you know that the person or the people working on Eevee Next are also working in the GPU module to help with the real-time compositor in the viewport, to help with Vulkan support. It's not just Eevee Next, this isolated project. Eevee Next comes with Workbench Next, with the new Grease Pencil drawing, with the GPU module for the compositor. It's massive, the amount of work and the areas that the changes that are coming. It's not just the one Eevee Next, it's all of the nexts. Just to give you an idea of the improvements. Also, the Grease Pencil team has been super hard at work. Amelie, Volk, Paratic even, and Antonio Vazquez, I bet in one way or another. I don't see commits by him, but for sure. And Chao Li, is that you? So thanks everyone working on the Grease Pencil version 3.0 project. From GE of Grease Pencil, we move into GE of Geometry nodes. There has been a number of improvements. Actually, you can see some of those here, but let me actually go one by one in the ones that I think are more relevant. So extract bake items from simulation baking. So the goal is to reuse the same bake items for simulation and normal baking. So this should make things more performant, because you're reusing whatever was available. The next change is actually related to another section, which is the node group operators. So the node group operators having renamed into tools, node group tools. This has been added actually a while back, but there has been some improvements in this workflow, because this is part of Blender 4.0, so it's kind of big. Draw node operator inputs in the redo panel. So when you run an operator that was built with geometry nodes, now you get the inputs showing up in the bottom left redo panel. Also, the geometry nodes operators now also support more object types and modes for curves, mesh, and point cloud objects. And finally, there are new tool-specific nodes that are only supported in the tool mode of the geometry nodes. Have you seen it? How it looks? It's kind of crazy. You first have to enable from the preferences under, let's make my UI slightly bigger. From the experimental, you need to enable node group operators. And once you have that on, if you go to the geometry nodes section, you create a new geometry nodes. These are the nodes for the modifier, right? Like we're used to. However, there is a new drop down next to the geometry node, the editor picker, which you can change to tool, and that shows the nodes that are for tool. And once you're here, you can actually add new tool, and you have a few new nodes that are only shown, and they're specific to tool creations or operators in geometry nodes. There is 3D cursor one, gives you the location of the 3D cursor. Face set, you can get face set information for sculpting or whatever. Selection gives you the current selection in the viewport, which is important to execute, right, operations. You can set the face set, so you have face set and face set, and the same way you have set selection and face set selection. So you can actually change your selections from geometry nodes with an operator. Like for example, when you cut with a knife, for example, and a part of your mesh, and then or do a boolean, and then at the end you end up with the selection of a new geometry, you can do that now with this kind of operations. Super cool. Again, this is experimental, people. All right. The next thing for this will be gizmos. If we can create gizmos from here, from the tool mode of the geometry node, it's gonna be enormous. Such as enormous, the next topic, because we go from G to H for Hydra. I almost didn't get that one. All right, Hydra. What does it mean? Blender now supports USD Hydra delegates. Why is this a big news? Well, because it means that Blender now can be hooked up with, well, actually, let's look at the wiki, because the wiki has notes about this. In release notes 4.0, rendering, I believe. Is it right? No, wait. Core is a core thing. No. API? Cycles. Where is it? I don't remember. It was somewhere over here. It's not interface. It's rendering. And I'm showing some spoiler of the new. Wait, pipeline assets and IO. No. I don't know where I've seen it. I can probably access it. It's an add-on. Yeah, but it's add-on. I know it's an add-on, but Storm is an add-on, and now I'm spoiling the other part. The implementation, it has to be an API rendering or core. There's no way. Maybe Hydra delegates and Python API, which has nothing to do because it's not even Python API, it's C++. Anyway, long story short, why is this a big deal? Because Hydra delegates are renderers that Hydra render delegates are renderers that have that speak a language that other, it's like a language that many renderers can use to communicate to each other. Blender now supports that language, that specification. So renderers that are already the Hydra delegates, like well, Redshift, for example, they have their own add-on that uses the Blender render API, the Python API, to connect. However, they can now use the Hydra render API, which is in C++, is much faster, more performant, and the results should be much more tighter integration, but also enables other render engines that do not have these, that are Hydra delegates that do not have this integration. Well, RenderMan is a Hydra delegate, however, of course, because it's USD is made by Pixar. I don't know which one could be a render that is a Hydra delegate that is not yet integrated to Blender directly. But anyway, it's kind of a big deal because this makes Blender to play nicely with other 3D applications. And also, if you make the shaders work with this render engine, it should be compatible with other render engines. Cycles still not a Hydra delegate one-to-one, I believe. So it's mainly for other for add-on developers to use this new API. There is more information about this in the API, in the Python API docs, and also in this commit by Bogdan Nagirniak. And such a nice welcome change. Also, there is an add-on that was introduced with this. Let's go to the add-on section, which is a renderer. It's a real-time renderer, part of USD. When you enable this add-on, it can be chosen as an alternative to Cycles, Eevee, and the Workbench. So if you enable the add-on, the Storm add-on, this is using, now you can choose it from here. Oops, I move my face out of the way. You can choose it from here, and now you can preview your render in how it would look similar to other render engines. So prim calling, I guess prim for primitive. Tiny prim. Yeah, maybe some names have to be tweaked so they are more Blender-ish like at least say primitive. We don't shorten words anymore unless it's max instead of maximum. But anyway, so the whole pipeline is right there. There is another option that was added after that commit to export through USD instead of the Hydra API. And finally, speaking of USD, now you can export USD preview surface for materials, sharing the code with the USD export as a step towards making Hydra and USD more consistent. Upcoming USD hooks will provide more control over material export rather than always using the preview surface. More changes in the internationalization. We can actually look in here. The internationalization work keeps moving forward thanks to Damian and Bastian and the whole team of translators, the BlenderToday project. Let's move on because I'm already over. No, not over time. But Keymap changes this week, a bunch. So okay. Avoid 3D view transform inheritance. This moves shared transform operations out of the 3D viewport keymap into a template function which with each mode the keymap uses. This allows sculpt mode to key bindings which were bound to transform actions that don't make sense in sculpt mode, like transform, the default transform actions. Next. There is an experimental toolbar toggle pie preference. This is a new option in the keymap that allows you to, if you go to keymap, region toggle pie. Basically what it does is changes the N key to a why is it experimental? Anyway, this changes the sidebar and the tools to be, and even the header to be toggled with a shortcut. So the T key is actually gone for the toolbar, and the N is actually now made into a I don't know if I agree with this, because the T is more reachable. It's next to the R. So I think I would do default toolbar or not. What would you do? So the N key now toggles this region toggle there. So you go to the right and it's a sidebar. So instead of just pressing N, you do N slide and move to the right. Kind of the same-ish. But now you can also toggle the header and toggle the tools. And another one, which actually shouldn't even show up because it says asset shelf, but what asset shelf? I don't know what an asset shelf is because I haven't enabled it in the experimental sections yet. So that shouldn't be shown there. I'm gonna write that down. Asset, because tomorrow we have a meeting in the UI team, so I can mention that. It will be fixed. Then, what other change? The operator is region toggle. Then, restore mirror transform shortcut in weight paint mode. Unintentionally moved weight paint transform should always follow post mode transform. This was a fix. The key map for this is also a big one. This is a change in how Blender works compared to 3.6 in terms of shortcuts. Some muscle memory to be broken, but it's for the greater good, for consistency. Simplify default key map for paint mode. This is part of the design task to improve the overall consistency. So there will be an accompanying video with this. So just there will be a video in the documentation. This removes various shortcuts and use or blocking the shortcuts. So for the brush tool shortcuts, the mesh sculpt mode shortcuts, draw Shift S for smoothing, pinch, layer, and so on and so forth. The duplicate the topo shortcut for the editing detail size, it was duplicated. And grease pencil undocumented draw tool specific guide shortcuts. Also move erasing the box and the lasso gesture shortcuts out of specific tools and into the draw mode overall. So this is mainly a simplification of these shortcuts. They can be added back, of course, but the idea is to simplify the key map so you can add your own. Also because it might intersect with other modes. Then that was the first commit, the deletion, the cleaning up. Then the next one is improve the consistency for the painting mode. So the standard, the goal is to sync up very common shortcuts between all the draw, paint, and sculpt modes, which were not consistent. Some shortcuts existed in sculpt mode, but not in draw, paint. Now these should be consistent. Avoid shortcuts, conflicts, and remap blocking shortcuts. Add missing common shortcuts and make some important shortcuts more accessible. For example, the sample color used to be S, now it's Shift X. Set vertex color used to be Shift K, and now it's Control K. Stroke method menu used to be E, now it's Alt E. The new is paint smooth, now it's Shift left mouse, which is something, or Shift the pen button for smoothing. Sample weight is Control left mouse. That used to be Control left mouse, is now Shift X, which is also similar to sample color when in paint mode. Sample group, Shift Control X. Set the weight, again goes to Control. Linear gradient from Alt left to Shift A. Radio gradient, Shift Alt A. Stroke method from E to Alt E. So basically it's changing and unifying a bunch of these shortcuts for consistency across mode. But there is some muscle memory to tweak. I think this is going to be better explained with an actual video to show the previous and the new, what is better about this. But if you haven't followed the thread, you can see the pull request or the reference keymap change with all the information, the shortcuts, and overall. Next. Also related to the keymap, add and update selection mode shortcuts. Paint mask M is changed now to 1, vertex selection to 2, increase pencil point selection 1, stroke selection 2, and segment selection 3 to be more consistent with the regular selection modes in Blender. Use Alt left mouse button for selection in vertex and weight paint modes. For vertex, face, and pose bound selection, replacing the control which was previously used for selecting. This is needed so control and shift can be consistent between all the paint modes. Loop selection is available with Alt and left mouse button, but only when the selection tools are active. Only when the selection tools are active. They're always available with the right-click select keymap. This also resolves a conflict where the box and lasso select tools couldn't be used to deselect via control, because the control left mouse button was also clearing that selection. And finally, the compatible keymap, the industry compatible keymap, has been updated with consistency to match other parts of Blender. I have a request that I need to do to Julian on this. Someone at SIGGRAPH mentioned that they use the industry compatible. Actually, many people came by the booth and mentioned that they use the industry compatible keymap, and they were suggesting, and there were some changes, and they were mentioning how it was felt that it was a bit abandoned. But part of the reason it's abandoned is because not many people report issues on that area. So if you have this kind of requests, always just file up a bug report if things don't work, or ask in the forums. It's like, hey, is anybody working on this? Or maybe contribute some improvements yourself. Okay. Moving on, because otherwise I will never finish. Where am I? The letter K. All right. Library override. Plenty of changes as well this week in the library override, improvements, performance, and so on. Then mesh changes, or also some changes. Some basic small UI, basically renaming polys to faces. This is more under the hood changes. Improvement in performance. Extract loose edges and vertices in 2 threads. This saves around 40 or 50 milliseconds when opening a file with a 16 million face mesh. This is some under the hood changes. This is not under the hood. This is improvements in performance, parallelize, edit selection, and visibility interpolation. So again, multi-threading support for these. For edit selection and visibility interpolation. Flashing visibility to vertices and edges after a change to faces became 3.5 times faster, from 90 milliseconds to 24 milliseconds. And the flip faces utilities have been replaced with a new system, and it's now it's about 3.25 times faster. Also, very nice. Flip faces now faster. And finally, there has been some work in the API for assigning vertex normals in the mesh API. Next, some more improvements in metal, but not more under the hood. Multi-resolution, simplify grids normal update and grid to face map. Also related to performance with multi-resolution, reducing memory usage and simplifying the code. Let's talk about nodes. So from M we go to N for nodes. A few changes in overall the nodes section. So it's not geometry nodes per se, but it's just nodes in general. Copy socket values with the same identifier instead of the name. Remove the experimental node panels feature. Yes, this was added, I think, way too early. And the UI wasn't great, and the implementation is going to change. So the feature, it's not gone as in from the roadmap, it's just that implementation has been replaced, has been gone. It's now gone. New feature, floored module mode to math nodes. So they used to only have modulo, and now they have floor modulo. The this can be created, can be used either with the wrap operation or a combination of multiple math nodes. However, most methods obfuscate the actual intent of the artist and the math operation that is actually used. So super nice. This patch adds a module using floor division to the scalar math node, explicitly stating the intended math operation, and renames the already existing modulo to truncated modulo to avoid confusion. Only the UI name is changed, so this should not break compatibility. So only labels have been changed. So if you have an add-on that uses this node, nothing should break there. Speaking of breaking the internet, something that has been gone since the days of Blender internals from 2.7. Remember Blender internal? You used to have previews in the shader editor. Well, now this has been brought back. It's experimental, so you have to go to the preferences, then you go to where are the previews? Shader node. We have so much experimental. Actually, have there's 3 panels, each one with several settings that are experimental. It's called shader node previews. It's in the new features section. Once you have that enabled, go to shading and just tweak your shaders, and you can toggle the preview on each one of the nodes. This is used on this should work both for Eevee and for cycles, and it should be a similar experience that you get from previous versions, from the back in the old days. Now it's using the new layout that it shows on top of the nodes, and also can be disabled individually but also globally. If you click on the overlays and then previews, and then this is another thing that I'm gonna bring to the UI meeting tomorrow, because I don't think this is the way to go. Basically, you can choose between flat and 3D. Flat and 3D, and it's using, I mean, many things to object here. It's using the icon for this, for the plane and for the sphere, but actually it's not really just 3D. This is using the preview from the material settings. So if you choose here the cloth, then you have the cloth here. So then the sphere icon doesn't make any sense. And it also, you can have the flat preview here, and the thing is in 3D, so flat no longer makes sense. So what I'm going to propose is to have the basically previews on off, and this would be like this is off, and then the other one should be just this drop down, the same that you have here. So just take this drop down and put it here, because it actually is affecting both previews. I don't know if this is gonna break some things, but I think that's the way it should be. What do you think? A drop down that lets you choose between flat, sphere, cube, and so on and for fluids. You can have everything. Next. Let's see, what was the next feature related to the user interface? Oh yeah, now related to this change, actually now there is a ability to preview shader output nodes such as AOV, group, and materials, which were not supported before. And the next commit, it says to use flat previews by default, but there is a but I think we should reconsider how this is done. And someone here says the no need for the flat mode then, since the first preview option there is a flat plane. Oh yeah, I would remove the flat plane option, and then this, I mean, I wouldn't remove it. I would just expand this to use all the settings in a drop down, and then this should be in line with the previews. So maybe there could be like a title that says previews, and then this is a one inline change that shows that lets you change, like similar to the overlays that you have one inline drop down, maybe something like that. But you need the flat. Flat is important to have, because flat is for when you want to have the for a texture, for example, or a plane or a flat surface. Anyway, next, OBJ fix. This is an important fix if you are using, if you have polygons that are very large. For example, 7,000 vertices in one polygon. Now this should not fail anymore. It is changed by Adas. Thank you, Adas. Python API has a whole bunch of changes as well this week. You can follow, you can see pretty much every commit in the there's a whole changes. There's a bunch of changes in the outliner too, which I'm not going to mention because they're porting to the new 3 element, but it's a super important work that Almas Chimbai is doing as part of the Google Summit of Code. Then Python API, also many changes that you can check in the full post, and I'm going to mention them, except the one that is exposed the mapping vertex positions to the B-bone segments. So if you're doing any kind of add-ons related to rigging, check that out. Then okay, this change I already talked about it, is that now the minimum version is for blend files saved with 4.0 is going to be 3.6. Then going forward, sculpting, many changes in terms of performance, multi-thread, PVVH, mesh triangle, bounce calculation, about 10 times faster to enter while entering. My English is really broken. I've been talking all week during at SIGGRAPH. Let me have a drink. When entering sculpt mode, the bounds of each triangle are calculated serially. Doing this in parallel, so using all your cores in your precious multi-thread, multi-core CPU, it's about 10 times faster on a Ryzen 7950X, but it should apply to other models as well. Of course, the more cores you have, the better. 10 times faster entering edit mode, sculpt mode. Nice. Again, more performance by hands. Reduce the average runtime of building mesh PVVH nodes from 4.2 to 3.3 seconds in a basic test with a 16 million face grid on my hardware, which again is a Ryzen 7950X. This is probably mainly because improved inlining with C++ templates. So, nice, welcome change. Reduce the overhead of PVVH drawing. For multi-resolution, I observe a change from 290 milliseconds to 63. Nice. And for meshes, I observe a 30% improvement from 1.7 to 1.3 seconds. Neat. When measuring the first data upload to the mesh. More parallelization. Improve the PVVH building time for a 16 million multi-res sculpt by about 100 milliseconds from 470 to 370 milliseconds. Neat. Remove dynamic topology smooth shading option. Actually, this is not related to performance, but this is an option that dynamic topology used to force. It's a setting to force that smooth shading. It's no longer needed because the new mesh attributes, the mesh attribute system that has been worked on over the past few releases is now reached dynamic topology, so you can actually use the data from the edges themselves. No need to force it. And finally, more PVVH draw performance improvements for meshes. So the tested runtime for the initial data upload after entering sculpt mode with a 16 million vertex mesh that used to take 1350 milliseconds is now 680 milliseconds. So twice, at almost a 2x improvement. In my test, the performance improvement was only observable for the initial data upload. Theoretically, it's a more general change, apparently. So again, and avoid recalculating phase normals. That's always good. Let's go a bit further into, well, actually this is marked as Sculpt UI, experimental asset shelf for brush assets in sculpt mode. But this, again, this is going back to the asset shelf, which has been committed to Blender, although it is experimental. So I don't know if I should show it or not. Should I? How long is this episode already? 1 hour. All right, let's see the asset shelf. Or not. Should I save it for another episode? Yes, otherwise I'm not gonna have time for answers. I'm gonna save it for the next episode. Next, transform. Let's talk about transform. In the 3D view, after navigating, the initial cursor position was updated based on the relative position of the 3D cursor in space. Now the initial relative position is maintained, but moved closer to or further from the 2D center based on zoom. This fixes two issues and two bug reports. Use transform pivot for auto depth during navigation. To avoid the small jumps during the pan operation, a feature was implemented in the operator utility that replaces the point used for auto depth. So this should fix this jittering effect that you have when you are calculating auto depth. It's a setting in the preferences. And the proportional distance algorithm has been simplified. Cool. Doesn't say if it changes anything for users, but it should be simplified. Let's move into the user interface changes. A lot of messages has been improved in terms of naming and tooltips, and you can find the full list in the even some typos having changed. So you can check out this in the full blog post. Fix and improve few messages by Damien Picard. Next, show spreadsheet scroll bars when necessary. Nice. Did you ever notice that the spreadsheet editor was showing the scroll bars even when not necessary? So now they only show up. So by default, in the default 1080p window, you're not going to see the scroll bars, only if there is actually content to be scrolled. Yay. Thank you, Harley. Next, some refactoring, some improvements in the redo panel, and to bring back the region whenever possible. Another small renaming is that proportional influence now has been renamed to proportional editing in a tooltip. Some items were missing in weight painting. So to sample the weight or the color operator that you can do with a shortcut, that was not available in the menus. Now it is. Sample. Some improvements in resizing the windows. Nothing too big. Again, related to items missing in the menus, the gradient menu items that you can use to paint gradients was only available as a tool, but not and as a shortcut, but not as an option in the menus. Wow, never noticed that. It's you get used to use shortcuts, and then yeah, this should be exposed for accessibility, but also to discover. So now if you are in weight paint and I search for gradient, I see the weights gradient, and now I can see actually where it is exposed. Here, gradient linear, gradient radial. Nice. Next. Rename distort socket in the lens distortion compositing node. Yeah, this used to be distort, now is distortion, because distort is a verb and the socket should be distortion. Small one, but important for consistency. The external text editor presets are now uppercase, so they match the other parts of Blender. Some improvements to avoid flashing the color text when clicking preview tiles, then support asset shelves, which I'm going to show in the next episode. When it's a bit more complete, it doesn't make sense to show it now. And that's it. Then it's a small RNA rename for the resolution percentage, which was the percentage symbol. Now it's resolution scale. USD, let's talk about USD, generic attribute support. This is the part 2 of the patch I wrote moving USD over to the new attributes API for colors, writes Charles. This adds support for more types of generic mesh attributes. Attribute types and domains are converted for their USD counterparts where possible. For example, float attributes used for modifying shader masks or integer attributes for grouping are now able to be round-tripped. Due to the differences in the two systems, some conversions are necessary. If you export to USD-A, you will find the attributes get prefixed with a prim vars semicolon namespace. This is expected behavior and identifies the exported attributes as different from other USD schema. You can read more about it in the change in this commit that is linked in the description of this video, and you can find on Blender community. Regarding USD export, there is also a new commit this week, prototype invoking Python chasers. This commit allows invoking user-defined Python hook functions to extend the USD export functionality. Added support for registering subclasses of a new bpy.types.usd hook type, which may implement the hooks as member function. Supported hook functions are onExport and onMaterialExport. Also added definitions and Python registrations for USD Exin export context and USD Material export context structs. Finally, we have still a few changes, and VSE, the video sequence editor, improved drawing of strip tile and preview. This patch includes a set of smaller changes to address visual inconsistencies and bugs. Where's the pull request for this? I'm curious about this change. This is changing colors and I'm sure it's fine, but I need to see a picture of before and after. This commit shouldn't go without a pull request. Maybe the pull request is what is this pull? Let's see. I'm curious about this. So let's see. Blender. Ooh. Spoiler alert. Enable heap APU. No, it's not there. So this commit actually it lost the pull request. I'm gonna note this for tomorrow's meeting again. If something changes in the UI, we should show a picture and before and after, and this should link to the pull request. Should be, especially if it changes the theme, should be reviewed by someone from the UI. Next, Vertex Paint. Add option to lock alpha for set vertex colors. Ooh, nice. It is a common practice in game development to rely on coding various data into the alpha channel of the mesh, and there was no way to preserve that when using the vertex colors operator. Absolutely. I got people asking about this. Now there is an affect alpha option similar to what we have for brushes, and when that is disabled, the existing alpha is locked or preserved. I wouldn't call it lock, but preserved. Is that the name we're giving in the... No, it's only affect alpha. Cool. Awesome. Great to hear. Vertex Paint improvements. Okay, Vulkan. There are also several changes in Vulkan and several refactors too. The refactor section is quite large. Then let's go into, where is Vulkan? Here, shader compilation errors. Enable Draw Manager test cases. There are no tests cases for the Draw Manager using Vulkan. Then, navigation, walk navigation, the shift tilde operator. This commit by Andras Borzanyi adds custom jump height interactively. You can already change how high to jump, but now you can adjust it with dot and comma to increase the jump height, because those keys are the same for most layouts. Should it be dot and... Let's see. So if I don't know, what do you... Let's see, if I go into walk navigation and then I... Jump is with V, and then a jump, and I can adjust with the dot or with the comma how tall to jump or high to jump. Why don't we use plus and minus instead of dot and comma? Anyway, what do you think of that shortcut? The last change that I have to mention, it's only for those that are running Mac OS and are using a HDR display, like one of those XDR, the ones that come on their MacBooks, on their MacBook Pro, for example, or on the big Apple Studio displays. New option: add a high dynamic range option in the color management display panel. This enables display of extended color range values above 1.0 for the 3D viewport, the image editor, and the render preview. So you can actually see full-on high dynamic range in the viewport, and I can't demo this for obvious reason. 1, I'm using Linux. 2, I'm not using XDR. 3, it's not gonna translate easily on a non HDR video like the one you're watching right now. But trust me, I've seen it working. It's pretty neat. It looks like, yeah, well, the local dimming of it looks, yeah, much more bright basically when you have a very strong, you can actually tell. There is, if you need to test it and you have a Mac, I would recommend go to the Blender demo files, blender.org/demo, and in Eevee, the spaceship, the race spaceship file is very light, and the moment you toggle this option, which should be under color management when of course when you're using a Mac, it should show up here, and you should see how these points are much brighter. So nice. Okay, I think that was the last change this week. How late am I? Oh, super late. Should I do some questions? Let's do 5 questions. It's gonna be a super long episode anyway, so might as well do it a bit longer, but to get some interaction with the community. Otherwise, why would I do this live, right? You could just do it recorded. I'm gonna use a feature that I learned, someone teach me on the channel the other day, that I can shift click multiple tabs in Chrome and right click close a bunch of tabs at once. I didn't know that. Thank you. Let's see, how many comments do we have? 13 comments. And let's read the 5 top ones. As long as the accounts are not created just now, like this one, 350. Why do we have bots with like 1-letter names, values? Go on. Let's see. Glenn, first question there with the most votes, and I bet the votes in these questions are also protests. Oops, we made a mistake somewhere. The Blender China community. What's with the Blender China community? I know the Blender China. I have stickers of the Blender China community here. They're cool. They're nice. Hi Pablo, long time no see. Hope it all is going well. If it's okay, can we get a new menu draw mode with the drawing tools like curve, lines, shapes? It is a feature request. Well, can we get a new menu named draw mode with the drawing tools? The actual draw mode is saved for Chris Pencil. That's the issue. We have draw here, and we're actually not drawing in. I don't know. It would be nice to clean up the menus a bit and have the shape and line tools together instead of having drawing tools in an edit menu. Maybe. I don't. Maybe it would make sense, but the thing is, it's not drawing. Or is it? Could you make a mock-up or an maybe a right-click select option? Option, sorry, a right-click select the proposal with the tools that you think should go in that menu. Also, can the mesh snap utility add-on be added to this new draw menu? So we have a new mesh line tool, and when we first open Blender, Yes, although we have to be careful with which add-ons we enable by default, because every new add-on that you enable here, it slows down Blender slightly. So we shouldn't have all of them. For example, I would love to have Rigify on by default. Like right now, it looks like Blender can only add like one bone rigs, but you can add humans, and this should be and animals and basic riggings and what does it say? Submenu, basic submenu, animal submenu. Looks like a bug. Anyway, we should have this enabled by default, I think. But we should again not enable all the add-ons by default, because otherwise Blender startup time gets affected. If you see your Blender taking too long to start, maybe disable those add-ons that you don't consider essential. Hi there. Motion graphics without text animation isn't motion graphics at all. Geometry nodes are already in the right direction, but why not make it even better? Currently, there are no kerning tools for the strength to curves node, but we can do character kerning with a traditional text object. Why not combine the traditional text object and the geometry nodes version of it? You can read text objects from inside geometry nodes either as mesh or curves if you choose the non-fill option. It will be extremely useful. That way we could combine with the great kerning abilities of the traditional text object with the flexibility geometry nodes for animation. Absolutely agree. This should be a proposal on right-click select. But yeah, it makes sense. Maybe how would it be? Maybe the add text, like once we reach feature parity, the add text could be an operator that actually adds geometry nodes. The same way we should treat that the same way as the Eevee is adding a US sphere now. It's a mesh operator, but it could be a geometry nodes operator that actually lets you change these settings from the geometry node settings, or maybe expose here. They would be exposed because of the change that actually that Hans added this week. But yeah, I agree. But I think we should have feature parity first between the two. Next, so how many are we? 1, 2, 3, 4. Hi Pablo, and hooray! I missed this. Thank you. I also missed it. I have two questions in geometry nodes. One, I want to capture a series of specific meshes within a collection of a collection using domain size, but right now domain size only gives the top level collection size info and seems to combine all the mesh data within it. I thought separating the components of geometry nodes have helped, but it didn't. Is there a workaround? Can we have something to give us access to data in sub-collections in the future? I'm afraid I'm not qualified to answer that. I'm not that familiar with it, but the collection input doesn't show. If you separate the children, doesn't that give you the actual, or it only applies to this collection? Output each child of the collection as a separate instance. And would that give you the collection itself, and then you can run this again inside of that collection? Maybe you can access that with like a index ID. I'm sorry, I'm not totally familiar with that. Maybe you can ask that in the Blender chat everything nodes channel. Blender.chat.channel. Everything nodes. I think that's the name. Yeah, everything nodes. Maybe you can ask here for some help from the community. Second question, the UV editor's modified edges is broken when using geometry nodes. This is the most helpful tool for checking UV results when they are edited by modifiers, and it would be excellent if that can be fixed for geometry nodes too. If it's broken, then is there a bug report for it? And if not, please make one so this can be followed by the developers. Modified edges is broken when using geometry nodes. Wait, does it work if you realize instances? Because then maybe it must be then maybe it's a performance issue, but please report it. And last but not least, hi Pablo, are there updates on that bevel geometry node with straight skeleton? The last I've seen of it was what? Geometry node, straight skeleton. Oh, bevel geometry. No, unfortunately not. Unfortunately, Howard, well, the developers working at this, none of them are working full-time for Blender. They have their own jobs and life, and I don't know the status of this project, or maybe it is related to something that happens in Blender itself. Maybe there was some discussion that I'm missing with the geometry nodes team, but unfortunately I'm not sure what's the status of that. I'm sorry. The same thing goes for layer texture system. We haven't heard about anything about it in a while. Well, the latest thing we heard about it is that the team no one is working on it at the moment. It's still on the roadmap, hopefully for next year, but no one is working on it at the moment because the people that could work on it have worked on other projects since then. Name it Compositor. Basically, the people working on it are Brecht and Sergey, and mainly Brecht, and yeah, they've been working on other projects. Unfortunately, again, we don't have enough people. Well, I mean, if we could clone Brecht, that would be insane, but we can't. So hey, look at that, we have two less than when I started. Wasn't it 84? Anyway, and last question since we are here. Hey Pablo, nice to meet you. How do I upload a profile picture here? I can see the photo button, but it doesn't work. I'm using Google Chrome. I think in the profile settings, in the settings themselves, you can click on. Yes. Tip: you can click on the avatar text here, and that will work. I need to fix that, but in order to fix this website, I need Francesco. Francesco is not here, and also I need a lot of patience because this website is a bit old at the moment. It needs some refactoring. Hopefully it's gonna come in the shape of a new website, hopefully when right-click select moves to Blender as a Blender official project, hopefully at some point. But for now, click on the avatar text. This should open the option. It's a bug, sorry. You know, at some point this worked. Websites stop working at some point. Fortunately, websites rot, if you don't mind telling them. That is all for this week. I think I answered 5+ questions. I am really out of time for today. I hope you enjoy this. I kind of miss this. Let's go here. I missed doing these live streams. I didn't miss getting some troll comments as always, but what can you do? You know what else? Something that you can do actually is just tune in next week, because next week is the 21st of August. I don't have a plan. There are no conferences planned, no trips planned. The only thing that is planned is to continue working Blender 4.0 because we are 2 weeks away. Yes, 2 weeks away of Beacon 1 ending, and that means focusing on improving whatever made it into the first section of the development phase of Blender 4.0. Kinda nuts, kinda crazy that 4.0 is already shaping up. That means moving into wait, I'm saying that with a lot of confidence, but shall we check again some of this? Let's see, August 23. Actually, I could swear it was going to be it's actually next week already, half next week. I thought it was the 28th at the end of it. All right, never mind then. We only have 10 days. Blender 4.0 is around the corner. Let's see how it goes in the next week. Maybe we have some surprises. Still, Beacon 2 has been known for also being a bit abused, and instead of just being new, improve and stabilized, it also the developers take the improve part very seriously, and they make some big features make it into Blender in that stage. Let's meet again next week around the same time, maybe a bit earlier, but definitely the same place, in another episode of this weekly live stream we call Blender Today. Thanks for tuning in. I hope I have a great week. Sorry if I didn't get to answer your question. You can try again next week. I'm not going to have 600 commits to go over, so there will be definitely more time to answer more questions. Please, let's meet again next week. Bye.